The traditional family roast is consistently voted one of the things we like best about British food. This joint of beef is from a locally sourced organic herd fed on grass. But much of our meat doesn't come from such sustainable sources. With the world population set to rise still further, intensive farms, like this one in the US, are also satisfying our growing hunger for meat. And that's a problem, because industrial livestock farming is responsible for a significant slice of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's also a major cause of global deforestation, as trees are cleared to grow crops to feed the animals. So what if instead you could produce meat in a different way? One that didn't involve rearing or killing a single animal. Cultured meat, grown from 1 or 2 cells in a laboratory rather than on a farm. Far from being a story from science fiction, it's actually happening now.
At Meatable, we know that people love eating meat. For generations, in everyday meals and shared moments together.
And the Dutch company, Meatable, are pioneers in this new field.
And the effects are undeniable. Deforestation, methane emissions, animal suffering.
We think meat is here to stay. We still see that meat consumption is on the rise. So what we are trying to do is say, hey, on the one hand, we have a product that we love. Can we find a new way of producing it? And in our case, we do that through cultivating the meat instead of growing it on the animal. What we are basically doing is looking at nature and trying to copy the process, the exact process that happens in the cow or in the pig, and we try to do that in our facilities. So basically, that starts with just a couple of cells. Cells start multiplying, and you basically create the numbers of cells that you need. And then the second step of the process is to steer those cells into muscle and fat cells. And then basically you have the building blocks of real tasty cultivated meat.
We're bringing together the brightest, most creative minds to perfect a process fueled by science, replicating nature.
Founded back in 2018, Meatable has so far raised $60 million from investors to fund new research.
The last funding round was earlier this year, and that basically was really based on the first sausage that we made. So our proof of principle is, can we do it? Can we make a sausage? And that's what we did. That was the big milestone late last year. And basically what we're now doing is really making sure that we have a scalable production process and that we can get to a cost-effective alternative for traditionally produced meat.
And bioscientists aren't just producing meat in the lab. At Clara Foods, based in California, they're using centuries-old fermentation technology to create egg protein without hens.
The food industry is massive, and it is about time that we really talk about how destructive it is in its current form. There are over 1 trillion eggs consumed every year. In the US, we slaughter over 1 million animals every single hour to feed less than 5% of the world population. When we talk about feeding the world, we have the resources to do it, but we're using the most inefficient technologies to get there, which are animals. Animals are very inefficient at converting grain and soy protein, which is what they get fed, to animal protein. And now there are plants and microorganisms that can do that much more efficiently. We use a technology called precision fermentation, where we essentially use microorganisms to produce protein. So in the same way that brewers use yeast to convert sugar into alcohol to make beer and wine, yeast can also be used to convert sugar into protein. And so we can make real animal proteins without using a single animal. Early next year, we'll be launching our first suite of animal-free eggs. And those will be eggs that you can make now, your delicious vegan meringues and angel food cakes and macarons and sponge cakes and frittatas and scrambles. And so ultimately for us, the egg was the holy grail because it is this indispensable, ingredient in the kitchen that is used to make so many of the foods that people in every corner of the world love.
And the scientists have a simple message for people who think that producing proteins artificially is something unnatural.
I think we need to sort of rethink what natural is, and we believe that with the approach that we take, actually that is very natural, because then the rainforest can remain the rainforests, animals can just graze in the fields happily and do not need to be slaughtered. So we think that there's a mind shift that's required on what is actually natural, and then I think people will realize that what we are trying to do is a new type of natural.
The UK government food czar recently recommended that we all eat 30% less meat in order to hit our climate change goals. So the idea of consuming protein grown in a lab as well as from a field is something we may have to get used to if we're going to continue with our meat-eating habits.